Today we are serving more than 800 banks in China. In the past decade or so, we managed to transform more than 100 conventional banks digitally. And about 5 years ago, I took the company outside of mainland China. And over the past 5 years, we managed to actually help more than 20 banks in Southeast Asia region on their digital transformation journey. So that's actually who we are. And we're talking about transforming banking with Chinese wisdom, right? So actually, I would like to think that the whole China, obviously a lot of people know that China probably started that digital transformation journey ahead of a lot of its neighboring countries, right? I actually see that what happened was actually 17 years ago, a similar pandemic, epidemic called SARS, not software as a service, SARS, that hit China quite severely about 17 years ago, right? This actually, in a way, a lot of people actually say that, SARS, in a way, created e-commerce because everyone was locked at home, cannot do anything. They have to force to be shop online, including the, grandpas and grannies, right? One of the biggest lessons learned, I think, in the human history is people's behavior are very, very difficult to change. So it takes maybe a pandemic such as this that we're all experiencing right now to change people's behavior. So this is actually probably one of the biggest silver lining out of this current pandemic that we're still experiencing, right? So, if I may, that the Chinese wisdom actually is not Sunline's wisdom. It's actually we are blessed to work with more than 100 banks, including the 20 regional banks in South Asia, on their digital transformation journey. And I can guarantee you that everyone's digital transformation journey is different. So hopefully I can share some of the experience with you today. The graph that you see right on this side is actually the year-on-year growth of the online wealth management and online digital microloans, as well as the third-party payment over the past 4 years in China. As you can see that the digitalization of this uprising fintech company, and you're probably familiar with some of the giants like Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, and so on and so forth. They actually pose quite a big threat to the traditional bankings, right? So what a lot of banks in China, initially what they did is they tried to, create their own ecosystem. So a lot of banks, especially the large one that has money and power, they're trying to create a so-called, super app, right? So, a very interesting test I would like everyone in this room can do. Everyone has a smartphone these days, right? You can very easily to rank, all the active apps that you use on your smartphone. You can rank them by screen time, right? Very easily. I can guarantee you that your own banking app, it probably is the last little dot in the end. It's actually the least active app that you use on a daily basis. By far the largest, the most active app anyone will use would usually be social media, right? In China, it's obviously WeChat. Here maybe Line, WhatsApp, whatever have you, right? So, the stats here, the first line, one of the largest banks in China is obviously ICBC. It tried to create a super app initially. Technically it's doable, right? But in real life, nobody is going to open up your mobile banking app to, order a taxi or, to call for a pizza. I'm not saying that, things like Robinhood cannot be done. It can be done. But what I'm saying is you should not do that within your banking. The old traditional bank, in SCB's case, like the cash cow and the growing star, right? So you're trying to separate, and the key word is actually collaboration. So in the old days, obviously, you say the customer, I'm Mr. Bank, right? You're a customer, you come to me, very centralized approach. But in the modern days, it's actually banking with and banking through your partners. So nowadays, the new way of doing banking is you need to push your product and services and weave those product and services into people's digital lifestyle. So you need to work and partner through and partner with your, partner. So collaboration is the key. Obviously on the other end of spectrum is, all of these, we call them underserved or, unbanked or underserved banks, right? So China has done a very good job lifting more than 800 million people out of poverty in the past few decades, right? From what I understood, Thailand today still have more than 5.2 million people living under poverty. If you're talking about full access to the traditional financial service, what I read is more than 33% of Thai population do not have full access or adequate access to the financial services, right? So, obviously, I guess, again, the lesson learned from China. So, all of these fintech giants, they saw the opportunity, right? So they come in. So you see that the Chinese government, the regulators are hammering down on all of these tech giants, such as Alibaba and so on and so forth. Reason why being is because banking also serve a very important social responsibility. I think the government tend to trust the banks more on being socially responsible. Maybe not so much for these tech giants, right? So because the governments are fearing that these tech giants are using the data monopoly and monetize this data and to exploit. A lot of people talking about financial inclusion, but financial literacy is equally important because a lot of these, if you like, underbanked or unprivileged people, they are not that financially literate. So being socially responsible is very important. So that's why in China, at least what we see now is the government's actually trying to open up these tech giants, force them to share data with the banks, with the traditional bank, trying to push all of these financial services back to the banks. So again, collaboration is the key, right? People talking about banking 4.0, right? So a lot of people think about banking 4.0 is purely from a channel perspective. Obviously, in the banking 1.0, you have to come to the branch. So the time, the banking service is limited by time and location. Then, of course, you have internet banking. You have ATM, right? So 24 hours, but still limited by location and internet banking and mobile banking and so on and so forth. But I think a lot of people mistakenly thinking that banking 4.0 is all about mobile banking app, but that's not true, right? So it's actually, in our definition, in Sun Lan's definition of banking 4.0, are these three layers, right? So a lot of people concentrate on the outer layer, which what I call is a digital skin. Obviously these days, I mean, in China, of course, people, 360 of their digital lifestyles are all online, from travel, accommodation, shopping, education, so on and so forth, all digital, right? So a lot of people, trying to wrap around their old core banking system, for example, just using a digital skin. But forgetting one important thing, because as I said, the new way of doing banking is all about banking through and banking with your partners. So in order to push your product and service and weave that into people's daily life, this core in the middle has also to change because they cannot answer because the time market simply is just too slow. So we are talking about a distributed, microservice-oriented, cloud-native, core banking system, which is 4.0 to support the so-called banking 4.0. But also another very important layer, if it's not more important, a lot of people tend to overlook is also the middle layer. I think Kong Michael talked about, 2027 about AI, empower, analytical. I think some of our previous speakers talking about alternative credit scoring. See, this middle layer actually becoming more and more important, especially in the wake of pandemic, because a lot of countries around the globe, they are pushed because they're trying to recover the economies. They push out and so on and so forth. Reason why being is because banking also serve a very important social responsibility. I think the government tend to trust the banks more on being socially responsible. Maybe not so much for these tech giants, right? So because the governments are fearing that these tech giants are using the data monopoly and monetize this data and to exploit. A lot of people talking about financial inclusion, but financial literacy is equally important because a lot of these, if you like, underbanked or unprivileged people, they are not that financially literate. So being socially responsible is very important. So that's why in China, at least what we see now is the government's actually trying to open up these tech giants, force them to share data with the banks, with the traditional bank, and trying to push all of these financial services back to the banks. So again, collaboration is the key, right? People talking about banking 4.0, right? So a lot of people think about banking 4.0 is purely from a channel perspective. Obviously, in the banking 1.0, you have to come to the branch. So the time, the banking service is limited by time and location. Then of course you have internet banking, you have ATM, right? So 24 hours, but still limited by location and internet banking and mobile banking and so on and so forth. But I think a lot of people mistakenly thinking that banking 4.0 is all about mobile banking app, but that's not true, right? So it's actually, in our definition, in Sunlan's definition of banking 4.0, are these 3 layers, right? So a lot of people concentrate on the outer layer, which what I call is a digital skin. Obviously these days, I mean, in China, of course, people, 360 of their digital lifestyles are all online, from travel, accommodation, shopping, education, so on and so forth, all digital. So, 360 of their digital lifestyles are all online, from travel, accommodation, shopping, education, so on and so forth, all digital, right? So a lot of people, trying to wrap around their old core banking system, for example, just using a digital skin. But forgetting one important thing, because as I said, the new way of doing banking is all about banking through and banking with your partners. So in order to push your product and service and weave that into people's daily life, this core in the middle has also to change because they cannot answer because the time market simply is just too slow. So we are talking about, a distributed, microservice oriented cloud native, core banking system, which is 4.0 to support the so-called banking 4.0. But also another very important layer, if it's not more important, a lot of people tend to overlook is also the middle layer. I think Kong Michael talked about, 2027 about AI, empower, analytical. I think some of our previous speakers talking about alternative credit scoring. See, this middle layer actually becoming more and more important, especially in the wake of pandemic, because a lot of countries around the globe, they are pushed because they're trying to recover the economies. They push out a lot of loans. Maybe the risk management is not so tight. So I actually predict that you will see a lot of bad loans and non-performing loan ratio probably might rise next year. So the data actually make the so-called analytical, this analytical is actually about two arenas, in my opinion. One's about using data and AI for better position marketing, and the other one is about manage your risk better. So it's all about using the data, sometimes unstructured external data, to complete the customer profile so you know your customer better than before. So you can do more real-time precision marketing as well as credit risk management, real-time, not T+1. Right, so that's really the key. So these 3 layers, they can't, you can't just have the outer layer. You have to go hand in hand in order to support the so-called banking 4.0. Let me share some of the, wisdom, right? Some of the case study. Most of you probably very familiar with. I think still today, maybe on this planet, this is actually one of the most successful digital banking virtual bank on this planet. This is one of the first digital bank in China called HUAWEI Bank, right? So it's part of the, it's heavily invested by Tencent Group. They got their banking license in late 2014, right? We helped them to build their initial phase of core banking system. And then, within a short space of 5 years, they managed to reach this figure, which is astonishing, right? 100 million customers, virtual, no branches, everything's online. Of course, you might say that, it's China, right? China has 1.4 billion customers. Can this story be repeated elsewhere? I'm going to tell you that later, right? But look at this. This is very, very interesting, right? With that much customers, right? That 31 billion US dollars in assets, but their non-performing ratio is only about 0.5%. So this is exactly echoing my points early on, right? So obviously they are blessed because they can live and breathe the WeChat system, which is obviously the biggest super app in China. A lot of people's digital behavior is all in WeChat. So they managed to do a lot of alternative scoring and models to really understand the potential market. Their success story is actually all boiled down to one product. You know, in the old way of bankers thinking, you know, you might think that we need up to 7 products to create a so-called loyalty, right? The customer loyalty. But in their case, it's only one product. They initially specifically target at these, you know, university graduates. They just, you know, step into the society in Shenzhen. You know, obviously, as you know, that Shenzhen now is the Silicon Valley in China. The property price shooting through the roof. So all of these university graduates, they cannot afford to buy a property. They can only rent. But even rental, right? We're talking about small ticket items, you know, 3,000 to 5,000 renminbi per month, for example. You need to come up with 5 months because 2 months down payment, 3 months in advance. For this small ticket item, they cannot afford, right? So the bank usually those big data and AI, use those social behavior modeling. They analyze these target customers. So it's just one product got them 100 million customers with 0.51% NPL, right? Very, very, very impressive. And you also look at that, you know, when we talk about these wow factors, right? So a lot of, you know, a lot of banks here, I know we're all going through, you know, trying to create the minimum viable product, you know, this wow factor. But the wow factor, it takes a lot of iteration. So the time to market, that's why it's very, very important. You need to push out many iterations, and for the market to pick the winner. Winner cannot be picked internally by yourself. Right, so you need to keep pushing out the new product as long as it's minimal viable. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be bug free. Let the market choose. Right. So this new way of thinking is very, very interesting. One product can give them 100 million customers. You look at the next case, see, you know, whether the WeBank story can be replicated elsewhere. Right. This is a digital bank in Philippines. I think it's actually in one of Kong Michael's slides. So they got a banking license in late 2017. The central bank says you have to open a bank in a year, right? So before Christmas 2018, we opened this bank for them, right? Against on our core banking system. No branches, only 2 ATMs. So they only have one headquarter in the central Manila with two ATM machines, just one branch, if you like. And then what they did initially is they need to sort out the cashing and cash out problem. So what they did is they link up, you know, their system with 20,000+ ATM network. So other people's bank ATM network all over Philippines. So as long as you have this bank's card, debit card, you can withdraw cash from any of these 20,000+ other people's ATM network for free. Why they can do that for free? Because all the saving they save on the infra, they can pass up. You know, of course, you know, they get charged, right? Because as long as you see a Visa logo or BankNet logo, you can withdraw cash. So, but other, you know, Visa, of course, charge the money, other banks charge the money. But the saving they save on the infra, they'll be able to pass back on the customers. And cashing. So they managed to link up more than 8,000 7-Eleven network all over Philippines as the aging bank, right? So all they can train up, you know, the 7-Eleven staff to handle the cash. So all the cash handling can be handled digitally or through this, 7-Eleven network. And of course, they can do all the bill payment, you know, all the gas, utility bills. But one of the most important thing, they actually got them, you know, more than 2 million customers within a space of 2 million in 2 years. Not bad, right? It's true they're working with one of the most active e-wallets called Gcash in Philippines. You know, heavily invested by Alibaba, of course, right? So Gcash is the most active, have millions active users all over Philippines, right? A lot of merchants can take Gcash to a wallet, but the wallet cannot generate interest, right? Because it's not a bank. And nobody knows these banks. So what they did is the very first, again, wow factor, their smart saving product is they weave their smart saving product into Gcash. So people don't even know it's this particular bank. Because nobody's going to download your banking app if you don't know who you are. But they saw this attractive, initially they said, allow larger interest return on comparing to a normal CASA account in Philippines. So they generate high interest rate. So they use money to burn and to get all of these Gcash customers, because a lot of poor people in Philippines, right? But they can actually see their wallet, the money in the wallet, generate return on a daily basis. They're growing, right? Especially imagine the pandemic. So the customer just surge into banks. So once they become the banking customer, of course, then we can help them to download a banking app. Then what happened, right? Then pandemic hits Philippines. So what we help them do is push out a loan product, because a lot of people need money they actually managed to have like more than 1 million loan customers in the past 18 months, right? So that's how they do and create a so-called customer loyalty, just 2 products, one smart saving and 1 micro loans. So 2 million, now they have 2 million customers, 2 million saving customers and 1 million loan customers. So not bad, 3 years. For brand new, nobody knows who they are bank, right? And then you might ask, okay, these are very good, this is all, greenfield bank, but you are existing bank, you have a legacy system, so what do? So this is actually a legacy system. This is a bank, very small, buku 2, lower tier bank in Indonesia. So they have a legacy system. So what happened is this e-commerce company called Aku, I don't know whether you heard of it, probably not that popular in Thailand, but it's kind of popular in Indonesia. So this e-commerce company buying to this bank, set up a brand new bank. So we call them internal challenging bank. It's echoing to Conrano's point about the cash cow business and growing, the growth, right? I call it growing star. So you separate the business. Right? You separate the business. So use e-commerce. So you don't want to touch your existing business because nobody there to replace, right? Which actually leads to my next point, right? So they actually, this Akuraku using their e-commerce network, again, in 2 years, 3 million customers. 3 million customers for this brand new internal digital challenging bank. So amazing result, right? So which leads me to the next point, right? So people talking about, okay, I'm a greenfield bank, I'm an existing bank. So what are the typical transformation passes, right? Let's say if you are existing bank, most of you bankers here are existing bank. So nobody like to go there, right? Because they say too risky. I want to do a big bang, replace everything. Too risky. So a lot of banks, if they, of course, if they're happy with the existing vendor, they can always choose upgrade, right? But a lot of them, they're not happy. A lot of banks I talk to, they're not happy with the existing core banking system. So what do? They choose the digital skin only. So what I call a patching, which they still find struggling because the digital skin is wrapped around a very old dinosaur core. So every time you're trying to push your product to the market, you still have to rely on old core, right? So we actually coined the phase, we call it a parallel approach, which is exactly echoing Conrano's points about, cash cow business and growing star. So you separate, right? Let me zoom into that, right? So what do I mean by a parallel approach? Imagine, this is your cash cow, right? Elephant, right? So you don't want to touch that, especially in phase 1. So we call that ETB, existing to bank customers. You don't touch that. Let that generate cash cow per usual, business as usual. No risk, right? We set up a brand new, a rabbit, a parallel, a dual core, side by side. Of course, the new one talks to the old one, right? So you need to, have a customer-centric, the customer information file need to be consolidated. External reporting to the central bank, BOT has to be consolidated. Data has to be consolidated. But from a system point of view, it's a standalone system. So using this digital new core from a clean slate to attract NTB, new to bank customers. So then the cash cow and the growing stars, sorry, I'm stealing your term, very good term. Cash cow and the growing star, put a star in the end, is 2 separate business. That's only phase 1. So then, it's very easy to satisfy the board. The board will easily see the return on investment because this is not touching. You don't affect that, right? And no risk. And this one, how much you invest, how many new customers you generate, right? Like my example before in Philippines or Indonesia, can you generate 3 million, 2 million customers in a space of 2 years, right? So it's very easily quantifiable. But that's only phase 1, right? Phase 2, once this one is, settle in and then, running on track, you can always, trying to steal, use the word steal, your existing retail customers from the old core to the new core. What I mean by that is, everyone that involved, touched upon core banking all know that the reason why nobody dare to replace a big bank is because it's very risky. Why it's risky? It's because migration, right? If you're trying to replace that on day 1, migration is always the biggest risk. So we use a slow migration. I call it a gradual replacement mode. So if I'm an existing customer of the cash cow business, nothing stopped me from opening up a digital account in the new one, right? I have 2 accounts because, CIF, I'm consolidated. I can view all my accounts. I like my digital experience with the new core. I can move myself. Yeah, that's the key. Customers can move money, transfer money in the cell. So customer can migrate themselves. That's the second phase. So it's a slow and a gradual approach for all your retail customers and SME customers moving themselves, migrate themselves from the old dinosaur to the new one. And by phase 3, you're only left with a very handful, a small amount of corporate customers. Usually corporate customer is smaller in number and large in value, right? And the other important thing is I've seen personally a lot of core banking projects fail, actually not because of software, definitely not hardware, it's peopleware, right? You remember that 90% of core banking projects fail because of peopleware. Because people always, like I said, behavior change is the most difficult thing to do. People always in their comfort zone. There's always resistance to change, right? So, but using our three-phased, parallel gradual replacement methodology, by phase 3, most people train up already. By phase 1, by slowly moving phase 2. So the people issue is probably the risk is down to minimum. And then you leave the so-called big bang migration only for corporate banking customers at the end. So there are our three-phased approach. We call it a parallel, a core, a dual core approach, which is actually exactly echoing to SCB's methodology, cash cow and a growing star, right? And we do have a successful case in Thailand. This is the one. And one of our first customers in Thailand, they gone live on the deposit. Hopefully we are going through, following my three-phase approach. Hopefully, one day it can be one call for everything, right? So I think this is also echoing with SCB's approach as well, right? And with that, I'll come to my last slide. And as Mr. Dunn said, that we have actually a launch with HUAWEI today. So I'd like to announce this exciting news that we have pre-configured pretty much everything. We created a one-stop shop. You can view it as an out-of-box core banking system tailored for Thailand market. From obviously the infra. So HUAWEI is responsible for this, and then we're responsible for the software as a service. HUAWEI responsible for the infra as a service, and of course the platform as a service. And using our front end, open API capability to connect with all of your ecosystem in Thailand, and we like to obviously it's a full-blown core banking system pre-configured for Thailand market. So we like to launch that today officially with HUAWEI. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and that will bring to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Matthew Sean, CEO of Sunline Holding. Thank you for your great information เอาละค่ะสำหรับหัวข้อถัดไปนะคะเราก็จะเป็นจากทางหัวเว่ยของเรานั่นก็คือ